It's fantastic to see so many of you with us today. Welcome everyone to this special gathering to discuss McKinsey & Company's latest insights in this year's Women in the Workplace event. My name is Rosalind Cason Marcus, and I am the leader of the Black Senior Recruiting and Retention Hub here at McKinsey. We wanted to take the opportunity to amplify the voice of Black women in the workplace in this session. We're pleased to welcome a panel of McKinsey partners from North America, Europe, and Africa.
Let's talk a little bit more, because we've been talking about women holistically. Let's talk a little bit more about what's going on for Black women. When we see that dynamic around being the only, it only increases significantly when we're talking about Black women. And then when you dig under the experience in the day-to-day, and we look particularly at the dimensions of microaggressions, which we know to be a real driver of a sense of inclusion, we see that Black women are significantly more likely than other women, and certainly than men, to face these daily dynamics of microaggressions. So I think, the issue is not just one that is pervasive for women, but exacerbated by the dynamics for our Black women. And this idea of not feeling comfortable bringing yourself to work, not feeling like you have an equal opportunity for advancement, and maybe most troubling, this dimension around allies. If we go beyond COVID and we just look at the dynamics of allyship, which is one of the areas where we see that Black women feel less supported, just to be clear, it makes a real difference. And so when we think about, this dimension of what the chart shows here is where all non-Black women land in terms of percent who agree with certain these statements. Black women with allies in the middle, and then Black women without allies on the far right, is a pretty stark difference as we go through these dimensions of I can bring my whole self to work. I mean, there's a 2x difference, Black women with allies versus those without. And so as you go through these different dimensions of inclusion and microaggression experience, the pressure is very real, but there are levers that can be pulled, like allyship. And I think as we get into today's conversation, we can talk some more about, as we think about the different regional realities, what can be done here. We've got real progress over the last 6 years. We've got a significant threat to that progress. And when we dig specifically into the experience of Black women, the threat is even larger, and the mechanisms for support are even weaker. And so today, as we dive into the conversation, I want to really spend some time talking about those dynamics and what can be done.
Generally on gender and generally on historically underrepresented groups, and acutely for Black and Latinx women, progress had slowed, if not stopped. Secondly, when we look over our 5-year data set that Sarah was referring to around diversity, only 1/3 of companies have made significant progress and sustained that progress over the last 5 years. Now, a third's good, right? That's better than it was before, but it's by no means the majority. Many companies are resting on their laurels. Many companies have made good progress, but we're replacing top talent, not building on it. Many companies were sort of one and done with appointments, not building real pipelines. So I don't want to start us on a sort of a depressing note, but the reality of the facts are, if you feel like things were slowing down and stopping a little bit, that's what the data is saying as well. And then finally, culture, the inclusive environment, and whether it's microaggressions at an individual level or managerial skills, allyship, people feeling less supported in the workforce. So the good thing about this year is that we are shining a light on this issue with facts and data that can't be denied. But the data is startling, both in that it shows, generally speaking, progress is slowing on many dimensions of diversity. And if you have intersectionality in that issues and multiple sources of diversity and underrepresentation, as Black women around the world do, it's worse in those cases. And secondly, only about 1/3 of companies are making real progress. Now, whether that's will and their desire to do it, 90% of companies say they want to make progress, but the facts are only about 1/3 of them are really moving.
If I may start, I think in the report that Tanya and them released early in the year about the power of parity in Africa, South Africa is doing much better. It's one of the leading countries in Southern Africa, across Africa. And our gender parity score is around 0.76%, including in leadership positions. So we've done a little bit better than other countries, but we still have a long way to go. Vivian was talking about the functions that many women are still in line in support functions versus line roles. And we also observe that also in South Africa. I think based on that, with the functions that women lead, the challenge and the burden has been a lot on women for COVID. If you think about it, at the beginning of lockdown, companies had to think about how do we support our staff to stay at home and work from home and stay connected and have all the facilities. How do we communicate to our clients and our stakeholders of what we're doing? And how do we manage our risk? Most of those functions, especially in my clients, those functions are led by women. So in addition to doing homework and doing homeschooling and caregiving at home, the senior women had the responsibility of taking the lead at the start of lockdown to make sure that the organizations continue to function. The second thing that I would like to mention is that in South Africa specifically, we had an added burden of gender-based violence. At the start of lockdown, we have in this year, we launched for the first time a national line where people can call, a call line where people can call and report incidents of gender-based violence and also intimate partner abuse. And in South Africa, after lockdown, 3 weeks after lockdown, we had 120,000 calls that were made to this line, which are almost double the usual number. And this has been a big challenge, and it's not only affecting lower levels of women, it's also at executive levels. We have cases of women that have been killed by their partners that are in court right now. So this is an added challenge that is challenging women that are in the workplace at executive levels, and it's an added burden. Lastly, I work with a lot of SMEs, and again in this segment, this challenge of women is not only at corporate level, it's also for small and medium enterprise owners. Majority of them are women. They run the organizations, they run homes, and some of them are single parents. So it has been a huge challenge, and people now thinking about whether I close my business and focus at home, or I pivot my business and try to survive. It's been a challenge without the grandparents available to support at home, and also some of the help. The people who could not travel to their workplaces, the domestic workers, to come in and support at home. So it's been a huge challenge, and that's why people are thinking about, do I continue working in the corporate world? Do I continue working in my small business? I need a cushy job so that I can be able to support myself and my family. And this issue of gender-based violence is such a huge challenge that even the Solidarity Fund that was launched to support the health, to provide support for health for COVID-19, they had to set aside some funds to support NPOs that are supporting women that are in shelters because they're running away from home. Now, in a situation of lockdown, everybody is confined in the small space at home, and the husbands or the partners are more abusive than normal. And that is a huge challenge for us in South Africa.
We as Black women, as a global community, need to make sure that we try to make this research as comprehensive as possible and really include the full voices of the Black women, a significant proportion of those who are in Africa, as Nomfanelo was mentioning. Secondly, and just to building again, I think there's when we did the work around Women Matter at corporate level, I actually think there's a lot to celebrate also. When we looked at the proportion of women in leadership position on the continent, it was at 5%. that makes it at par with the rest of the world. And I think, when we look at many other data points, whether it's maternal mortality, many other things, we know that the African continent is significantly falling behind, and the opportunities for Black women is less of that in Africa, less of that it is in other parts of the world. So at least at the top level of corporate, to see that it is at the same level, I think is very refreshing. And it frankly also provides an opportunity to see Africa and African institutions take leadership on this topic. This doesn't have to be something that's led from Europe or that's led from America. This can be led from Africa, and I would really encourage every African institution to step up to that challenge. When we look at women, and in particular Black women in elected offices, it's much lower all over the world. And we see in Africa specifically, we looked at the data, huge differences between being in Nigeria or being in South Africa, where Nomfanelo is, where we, practically, I think Nigeria has never elected a single female governor for the whole existence of that country. And then we want to talk about affecting, systemic changes at the corporate level in societies, but we don't have women around the table also in the political processes. We're not going to achieve that. So I think that's an equally important topic to put on the table. And then the last thing I just want to say, Nomfanelo was talking about SMEs, and that's an incredibly important topic. In parts of the world, we've published the Power of Parity. We know that if we get more women into the workforce at large, not just in the top positions, and we will substantially increase GDP. In Africa, we're talking more than a 10% GDP addition in the growth just from embracing women more broadly. And that does mean that we need to think about the levers of all levels of societies.
The research will tell us a couple of things as we dig into why does this matter. Right? The work shows the financial relationship and the slow progress, but why are we even having this conversation, and does it matter? And so we could certainly go down the path, and in many instances do go down the path of the social, moral, right thing to do imperative. But if I pull back from that for a moment and just talk a bit about the different dimensions of business value, there are a few things at play here. And frankly, I think that these things in a COVID context are even more compelling. And the first is for organizations to thrive in this environment, they actually need hands down the best talent to do the work that they are trying to do. And the idea that Black women aren't a part of that is ludicrous. Exactly. And so not going down that path and cutting out that whole swath of talent, just hems in the nature of what talent you have access to. And frankly, it's not even just going after that talent. If you look at what particularly younger tenured employees and folks coming to the workplace with the newer capabilities are saying, they're not going to go work for an organization that isn't diverse and inclusive. And that means that doesn't have Black women, whether they themselves are Black women or not. And so the idea of not only are you cutting off sort of the tranche of Black women as talent, but you're also, opting out of some of the more talented folks that are coming into the workplace and younger generations. You just lose the talent war. So that, that's a big piece of it. I think there's another component of it when we look at the nature of understanding your customers and consumers, innovation, effective decision-making, all of those things, the academic research as well as our own research would show that diverse teams with inclusive cultures, right? So the inclusion nature of it, do make better decisions. The decisions might not feel as comfortable because you have all this kind of productive different lenses coming in, but they make better decisions and they are more innovative. And in this moment, that is what organizations need. I mean, it is always an important factor, but it is particularly critical in the context of COVID.
We know that lived experience and representative voices can speak truth to power and give an authenticity through all our experiences, but that alone is not enough to manage it, you need multiple sources of diversity: skill set, experiential, representational, and of course, professional experience and skills. And then once you've got that, you've got to manage it well. You have to have managers who have the courage to have courageous conversations. You need to have allies who know the skill set of being a good ally, no matter what your background. You need to know how to course correct. There are great examples of many companies, just like people, who've made mistakes but been able to course correct because they had the backbone of a capability set and skills. And it's treating it like a skill set. It's why I am encouraged by what we're seeing in the ESG space, of how that's being measured and monitored and tracked, and and in the case of environmental impact, priced in. We're going to get to a point, given how strong the correlation is with strong performance, where managing this as a capability is what we will expect of our environments, and hopefully people will learn better skill sets to manage it that way.
I think that's one thing that we don't talk about a lot, which is essentially that the average age for making CEO is around 53, 54. That is actually closely square to the point where it intersects essentially with the time of menopause, which typically happens between the age of 45 and 55 for women. So it's an incredibly critical point in women's careers, and lasts, for women anytime between 7 to 14 years. And a couple of problems around this. I think one is that there's actually very little research out there around menopause and exactly how it affects women. And also exactly, research that has gone into new products that women can use, whether they are clinical or whether they are non-clinical products. So we have a significant part of our workforce that are trying to progress into leadership positions, and they're suffering severe symptoms like depressions or cognitive impairments. We're talking about brain fog and all of these things. There's a challenge, and I think part of the challenge is for companies to recognize this. I think the other thing is actually for the medical community at large to recognize this and hopefully do more research into this topic. And again, we know that the base body to a large extent, at least until the 90s, was the male body. So we don't have enough research into this. And the thing just to add on this is, it seems, and the evidence is still coming out, that these symptoms might actually be worse for Black women. So this is something that touches all women at large that are trying to, they're probably at their single most important point in their career. And then it, affects disproportionately Black women. So I think this is something that, in the longer term, hopefully research will come and we will get more solutions that the women can use. But frankly, also as an employer, what are you doing in terms of different types of programs or things that can help women at that point in their career?
As I've spent time with organizations, the common refrain has been, but we don't have any folks who are ready. We don't have any folks who have the skills or the experiences to make that leap. And my challenge really is, okay, great, put them in the seat and make them successful. And that feels uncomfortable, I think, for organizations, because it triggers a sense of who deserves it and was it unfair and was it the opposite of all the things that we're trying to do. My response is twofold. One, when we get to a world where the likelihood of me getting into that seat isn't 0%, then we can start talking about reverse bias and all sorts of other. Until that point, we have to be quite bold. I was pondering the question. The interesting thing is we look into the data. It was disappointing to me to see how many people consider themselves an ally, but how inactive that commitment is. And so when I think about what's required here, it's not in your own head, I'm not a racist, I'm not biased. Of course I support women progressing. Of course I support Black women progressing. It's the active moment of when there is a conversation that speaks to, that has that subtle microaggression or a bit of bias underlying, leaning in and saying something. It's being able to sit in a performance review and say, well, you said that person is quieter. Like, does that have an impact on their work, or is that just a style discussion? And I think that we're quite a ways away from the 80% of people that consider themselves allies actively engaging, because the data shows that people are taking actions like that more like, 15, 20, 25% of the time. So for me, what is allyship or effective allyship look like? It's really about the active engagement in prompting and confronting bias, microaggression, putting people's name in the hat when it might not otherwise be there. And alongside the support, I hear you, I'm your friend, all those things that are maybe easier for folks to do.
If you don't set your own targets for a business that are concrete around diversity and inclusion, training requirements, inclusive practices, what is unacceptable behavior and consequences, celebrating heroes and sheroes across all different vectors of diversity, forgiving yourself when you make mistakes and being candid about that with your employees and partners. But if you don't have it as a goal, it just won't get done. That's true about a lot of things in our lives, and business is no different. And so I just want to really stress that point from Nonfanello's examples, because wishing something to be so, has never worked in history. If moral imperative alone was supposed to move the needle, the arc would have bent toward justice long ago. Real people, real humans with real imperfections and risks and compensation and imperfections need courage, but they also need concrete measures and progress to be able to get there. So I'm more convinced than ever that we have to incorporate this into targets and goals for companies and teams to really make progress. And I like incentivizing teams around the collective behaviors just as much as individuals, because we can't put it on one CEO or one manager's shoulders. We all have to take responsibility, yes, but system changes requires organizations and teams to change, as Joanna highlighted in the chat, not only individuals.